Imagine this. You're standing in a room full of people you trust completely. Your closest friend, your romantic partner, your mentor, all gathered around you, their faces warm with familiar smiles. But something invisible has shifted. The air feels different, charged with an energy you can't name. Your body knows something your mind refuses to accept. Your skin prickles with ancient warning signals. Your stomach tightens with primal unease. Yet everyone around you continues their pleasant conversations as if nothing has changed. This is the moment Nietzsche feared most. Not the obvious danger that announces itself with raised voices and clenched fists, but the silent predator that wears the mask of love, the wolf that has perfected the art of sheep's clothing so completely that even you begin to doubt your own survival instincts. What if I told you that the most dangerous person in your life right now doesn't look dangerous at all? What if they're the one who makes you feel most special, most chosen, most understood? What if the very qualities that drew you to them, their charm, their attention, their uncanny ability to say exactly what you need to hear, are the same weapons they'll eventually use to dismantle your sense of reality piece by piece? Here lies the great paradox of human connection. We are most vulnerable to harm from those we allow closest to our hearts. The stranger in the dark alley triggers every alarm system in your body, but the person who slowly, methodically erodes your trust in your own perceptions, they slip past your defenses like smoke through a keyhole, invisible until the damage is already done. You've felt it before, haven't you? That inexplicable heaviness after spending time with someone who, on paper, treats you well. That nagging voice in the back of your mind that whispers, something isn't right, while your rational brain insists you're being paranoid, ungrateful, or oversensitive. You've dismissed that inner alarm so many times that you've almost forgotten it exists. And that dismissal might be the most dangerous mistake you'll ever make. Nietzsche understood something that modern psychology is only beginning to grasp. The human capacity for self-deception is matched only by our ability to deceive others. We live in a world where manipulation has evolved beyond crude aggression into an art form so sophisticated that its victims become willing participants in their own psychological imprisonment. The question isn't whether you've encountered these hidden predators. You have. The question is whether you recognize them in time or whether they're still there, quietly rewriting the story of who you are while you sleep. The most terrifying truth about psychological danger isn't that it's rare or obvious, it's that it's everywhere, wearing the face of everything you've been taught to trust. But what if your confusion isn't a weakness? What if that persistent unease you keep trying to rationalize away is actually your mind's most sophisticated defense system, fine-tuned by millions of years of evolution to detect threats that your conscious awareness hasn't yet processed? The insights you're about to discover come from years of studying the darkest corners of human psychology and the brilliant philosophical observations of Friedrich Nietzsche, a man who understood the human capacity for both creation and destruction better than perhaps any thinker in history. If you stay with me through this exploration, you'll never look at relationships, trust, or your own instincts the same way again. Have you ever ignored a gut feeling about someone only to regret it later? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be the warning sign someone else desperately needs to see. And if you're ready to unlock the psychological secrets that could protect you from years of manipulation and heartbreak, make sure you're following along. What we're about to uncover will challenge everything you thought you knew about recognizing danger in the people closest to you. The reason you struggle to identify psychological predators isn't a flaw in your character. It's a design feature of your evolutionary wiring that has become tragically obsolete in the modern world. For millennia, human survival depended on our ability to quickly assess physical threats, the rustling bushes that might hide a predator, the stranger whose body language signaled aggression, the obvious dangers that announced themselves through sight, sound, and instinct. But Carl Jung recognized something profound about the human psyche that most people never confront. We didn't evolve to detect the predator who speaks our language of love, who studies our vulnerabilities with the patience of a scientist, and who weaponizes our own need for connection against us. These modern psychological hunters have learned to exploit what Jung called our shadow, the parts of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge, including our desperate hunger for validation and our terror of abandonment. Nietzsche saw this dynamic with chilling clarity. He understood that the most dangerous individuals aren't those driven by simple rage or greed, but those motivated by what he termed the will to power, the insatiable need to control not just your actions, but your thoughts, your reality, and ultimately, your sense of self. These are the people who don't just want to defeat you. They want to own your defeat, to make you grateful for it, to convince you that your subjugation is actually your salvation. Viktor Frankl, writing from the depths of human cruelty in concentration camps, observed that the cruelest guards weren't the obviously sadistic ones. They were the ones who convinced prisoners that their suffering had meaning, that compliance was wisdom, that resistance was selfishness. This psychological mechanism, the ability to make victims complicit in their own destruction, represents the evolution of human predation into something far more sophisticated and devastating than anything our ancestors faced. The hidden problem runs deeper than individual manipulation. Arthur Schopenhauer recognized that society itself has become a breeding ground for these psychological predators by teaching us to distrust our own perceptions in favor of social harmony. We're raised to be polite, accommodating, and to give others the benefit of the doubt, virtues that become weapons in the hands of those who understand how to exploit them. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote about bad faith, the lies we tell ourselves to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths. But what happens when someone else becomes the architect of your bad faith? When they slowly, systematically teach you to doubt your own experiences, to question your own memories, to believe that your instincts are character flaws that need correction. This is where the real danger lies. Not in the moment of attack, but in the months or years of preparation that precede it, during which your psychological immune system is slowly, methodically dismantled. The predator doesn't need to overpower your defenses if they can convince you to lower them yourself. And the most terrifying part? You might be living this reality right now, telling yourself it's love. What you're about to understand will fundamentally alter how you see every relationship in your life. The consequences of psychological manipulation don't announce themselves with dramatic revelations or sudden clarity. Instead, they seep into your reality like carbon monoxide, invisible, odorless, and deadly in their accumulation. Your brain, designed by evolution to detect patterns and maintain survival, begins to rewire itself around the manipulator's version of reality. Neuroscience shows us that repeated exposure to gaslighting literally changes your neural pathways, weakening the connections between your instinctual responses and your conscious awareness. The voice that once warned you of danger becomes quieter, more hesitant, until it's barely a whisper you've learned to ignore. This is where cognitive bias becomes a weapon against you. The sunk cost fallacy, your mind's resistance to abandoning something you've invested in, transforms into psychological quicksand. The more energy you pour into trying to make sense of their contradictions, the deeper you sink into their constructed reality. Your brain, desperate to maintain cognitive consistency, begins to rewrite your memories to align with their narrative. Consider the confirmation bias at work. Once you've accepted that your perceptions might be flawed, you unconsciously seek evidence that supports this belief, while dismissing proof of manipulation. You find yourself making excuses for behaviors that once would have alarmed you, rationalizing away red flags as misunderstandings, and gradually accepting a diminished version of yourself as normal. The social consequences compound this internal erosion. Manipulators are masters at isolating you from external reality checks, not through dramatic ultimatums, but through subtle suggestions that others don't understand your relationship, that your friends are jealous, that your family is toxic. Slowly, your support network shrinks, leaving you dependent on the very person who's systematically dismantling your sense of self. Cultural conditioning accelerates this process. Society rewards women for being agreeable and men for being strong, creating blind spots where manipulation thrives. We're taught that love requires sacrifice, that relationships take work, that walking away is giving up. Beliefs that become prison walls when weaponized by someone who understands how to exploit your deepest values against you. The most insidious consequence is what psychologists call learned helplessness, the gradual erosion of your belief in your own agency. You stop making decisions without consulting them. You second-guess every instinct. You find yourself apologizing for thoughts and feelings that were once valid parts of your inner world. Your authentic self becomes a stranger you occasionally glimpse in quiet moments before the manipulator's voice in your head drowns it out again. Perhaps most devastating of all is the theft of your future self. You begin to shape your dreams, your goals, your very identity around their needs and reactions. The person you are meant to become, bold, intuitive, uncompromising in your truth, withers in the shadow of who they need you to be. This isn't just psychological damage, it's existential murder. They haven't killed your body, but they've convinced you to kill your soul, one small compromise at a time. And the cruelest part? You thank them for it, because they've taught you to see this diminishment as growth, this silencing as peace. But what if there's a way to break free from this invisible prison before it's too late? The moment you recognize psychological manipulation for what it truly is marks the beginning of the most important rebellion you'll ever wage. Not against external enemies, but against the version of yourself that learned to accept less than you deserve. This isn't a gentle awakening. It's a violent resurrection of the part of you that was buried alive. Nietzsche wrote, "He who would learn to fly one day must first learn to stand and walk and run and climb and dance." One cannot fly into flying. Breaking free from manipulation follows the same principle. It requires rebuilding your fundamental relationship with truth, starting with the most radical act imaginable, believing yourself again. The first weapon in your rebellion arsenal is what Nietzsche called intellectual honesty, the courage to see reality without the comforting lies that make it bearable. Stop explaining away your discomfort. Stop making excuses for their behavior. Stop rewriting history to make their version of events more palatable. When someone's actions consistently contradict their words, trust the actions. When your body reacts with tension to someone's presence, honor that wisdom over their charm. Historical examples illuminate the path. Frederick Douglass didn't escape slavery by being reasonable with his masters. He escaped by recognizing that their definitions of reality were designed to keep him in chains. Maya Angelou didn't overcome abuse by understanding her abusers better. She overcame it by refusing to let their version of her worth become her own. Anne Frank didn't find hope by accepting the world's cruelty as inevitable. She found it by maintaining faith in her own perceptions, despite overwhelming pressure to abandon them. The counterintuitive truth about boundaries is that they're not walls designed to keep people out. They're filters designed to let the right energy in. Start small, but start immediately. Say no to requests that make you uncomfortable, even if you can't articulate why. Refuse to explain or justify your feelings to people who consistently dismiss them. Stop apologizing for taking up space, having needs, or existing in ways that inconvenience others. Here's the radical shift that changes everything. You don't need anyone's permission to trust your own experience. You don't need evidence that would hold up in court. You don't need other people to validate your reality before it becomes real. The manipulator's greatest power over you dissolves the moment you stop seeking their approval for your own thoughts and feelings. Reclaim your internal narrative by documenting your experiences in writing. Manipulators rely on your foggy memory to rewrite history, but written records preserve your truth. Notice patterns across time rather than getting lost in individual incidents. Track how you feel before, during, and after interactions with questionable people. The most powerful rebellion is building what I call reality anchors. Connections to people, activities, and values that remain constant regardless of the manipulator's influence. Reconnect with friends they've subtly discouraged you from seeing. Pursue interests they've dismissed as unimportant. Spend time in spaces where your authentic self can breathe without judgment or correction. Remember, they taught you to see your strength as weakness, your intuition as paranoia, and your boundaries as selfishness. The rebellion begins when you flip this script entirely, when you recognize these qualities as the very superpowers that will set you free. But the deepest liberation comes from understanding a truth so profound, it will redefine everything you thought you knew about power itself. Here is the secret that manipulators pray you never discover. Their power over you was always an illusion built on your own forgotten strength. Every moment you spent questioning your reality, doubting your perceptions, or reshaping yourself to earn their approval was a moment spent worshiping at the altar of your own stolen power. Nietzsche's most revolutionary insight wasn't about becoming stronger. It was about recognizing the strength that was always there. What does not kill me makes me stronger has been misunderstood for generations. He wasn't suggesting that suffering creates strength. He was revealing that strength is your fundamental nature, temporarily obscured, but never truly destroyed. The manipulator didn't break you, they simply convinced you to forget who you were before you met them. This is the ultimate paradigm shift. You weren't damaged by their manipulation. You were diminished by your own belief in their authority over your inner world. Every time you sought their validation, you handed them a piece of your sovereignty. Every time you accepted their version of events over your own direct experience, you trained yourself to trust external voices over your internal wisdom. Viktor Frankl discovered this truth in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. Even in concentration camps, the Nazis could control his actions, his environment, his physical existence. But they could never control his internal response to those circumstances without his unconscious participation. The prisoners who maintained their sense of self weren't the physically strongest. They were those who refused to let others define their internal reality. The most haunting realization is this: the person who hurt you isn't inherently more powerful than you. They're simply more committed to their own agenda than you were to your own well-being. While you were trying to understand them, accommodate them, and heal the relationship, they were systematically studying your vulnerabilities and exploiting your compassion. They won not because they were stronger, but because you didn't realize you were in a war. But here's where the story transforms from tragedy to triumph. The very sensitivity that made you vulnerable to manipulation is also the source of your greatest power. Your ability to feel deeply, to empathize, to see the complexity in situations. These aren't flaws to be corrected. They're rare gifts in a world that increasingly rewards superficiality and disconnection. The manipulator targeted you precisely because they recognized qualities in you that they lack and can never develop. Your intuition, that voice they taught you to distrust, isn't broken. It's so accurate it threatens their entire constructed reality. Your need for authenticity isn't naive. It's revolutionary in a world built on acceptable lies. Your refusal to become cynical despite betrayal isn't weakness. It's the rarest form of courage. The final truth is this: you don't heal from psychological manipulation by becoming harder, colder, or more guarded. You heal by becoming more authentically yourself, by reclaiming the very qualities they tried to convince you were problems. Your gentleness becomes discernment, your trust becomes wisdom, your love becomes fierce protection of what's sacred. Standing in this truth, you realize the most profound paradox of all. The people who tried to diminish you have actually revealed the magnitude of your own light. They wouldn't have worked so hard to dim it if it weren't blindingly bright to begin with. You are not broken. You never were. You were simply convinced to hide your brilliance from those who could never match it. The moment you remember this truth, their power over you dies, and your real life finally begins. What story will you tell yourself about who you really are now that you know the truth?